Hey people, in this video I'm just going to be putting a new set of rear brake pads on a 2010 Nissan Murano. Obviously you need to start by jacking the back of the car up and removing the wheel. In this particular instance I'll just be throwing in a new set of pads because the rotor itself was in good condition, just with some superficial wear. Now it all begins by removing the caliper retaining bolt. There's limited access to these bolts, so sometimes they need a bit of a thump to help get them off. Also just be aware that there's a dust boot that can sometimes get a little bit caught up or bound up as that bolt comes out, so just make sure that that's not winding in as you undo the bolt. Once that bolt has been fully removed, just put it aside and we'll inspect that bolt later on. Now you can just swivel the caliper out of the way and just lay it down there, and it just swivels on the other caliper retaining bolt. Now you can remove the old brake pads, and now you can actually see how much material is left on them. These were getting quite low. Obviously they weren't fully worn out yet, and it wasn't yet touching the indicator here that lets you know that the brake pads are low, but it was getting very close and they were due for replacement. The next step is that caliper piston needs to be pushed back into the caliper. You can get a cheap caliper tool like this that does it. If you don't have one of these, you can just use a clamp. You can see here it just will wind that caliper piston back into its housing. It's also at this point a good time just to check that the rubber around that caliper piston is still in good condition and not split, otherwise that will need replacing. Make sure that caliper piston gets fully pressed all the way back in so that you can install the new brake pads. Before installing the new brake pads, I like to give everything a good squirt down with some brake cleaner. This gives you a chance just to inspect all the bits and pieces and just make sure that those slides that the brake pads sit into are clean and have nothing that is damaged in there. Grabbing your new brake pads, just make sure you do compare them to the old ones, as you don't want to be fitting the wrong type. Also note that the wear indicator sits on the innermost part of the caliper, and that rounded portion of the brake caliper lines up with the rounded portion of the rotor. You don't want to put these in backwards. Also, obvious thing, but make sure the brake material is directed towards the actual brake rotor. With those in position, you can then just slide the caliper back into its place. Now typically when you buy a new set of brake pads, they give you this little bit of grease to put on the caliper retaining bolts. Just make sure you give it a good smear here. These are already in pretty good condition. Sometimes they get all gummed up and they need to be fully cleaned out, but I just gave this a little bit more grease. Also here I've just put it into the caliper mounting hole just to make sure that it does slide in nice and easy. Make sure you don't get any of this grease on the rotor itself or on the brake pads. Now you can tighten up that top caliper mounting bolt. Just make sure that dust boot ends up sitting in its correct location and it's not twisted or bound up in any way. Now because I put a little bit of grease on that mounting bolt, I also wanted to do the same to the bottom caliper mounting bolt as well. However, after I loosened this bolt and went to remove it, it can't actually be pulled all the way out because there's a suspension arm in the way, and I didn't particularly want to either move the suspension arm or remove the entire caliper mounting bracket from the back of the hub. I was able just to squeeze a little bit of grease just onto the section of the bolt here that matters. I wasn't too concerned about it, and like I said, this just was a quick brake pad change, and I wasn't as thorough as I probably could have been, but I don't see that causing any issues. Now with that side of the car done, it's time to jump over and repeat the process on the other side, because you always change brake pads in pairs. Hey, thanks for watching. Make sure you leave any comments or questions below and check out some of my other videos.